meeting's on and for the first couple of minutes, could I ask you, because we've got so many people on the call today, I'm not going to go round and do individual introductions, but you'll probably know if you've been to any of the network meetings that the usual standard, could you put in the chat your name and the authority that you come from? And whilst we don't stand on ceremony, particularly with job titles, it does help to know if you are a councillor or an officer. So just for our kind of recording of who's attending our sessions. So please do pop that in the chat bar. I'm hoping that everybody is fairly familiar with Teams, and if you're not, the chat bar is a little bubble that's on the top of the screen. So thank you. A few of those starting to come in now. Awesome. I will be joined this afternoon by Jeremy. Jeremy is a senior HMI, Her Majesty's Inspector with Ofsted, and he'll be taking us through some of the insights around the local authority guidance. Before we go over to there, hopefully everybody's seen the discussion paper which sets out our agenda. We will be here for about 90 minutes, and I do absolutely aim to finish on time so that you have your Friday afternoon back. I think, Meg, you put the discussion paper in the chat, although I can't see it at the moment, but that might just be me.
Just popping it in now.
Awesome, fantastic. Look at that efficiency. So whilst Meg just does that, we are going to start off with a little bit of a poll, and the polls are, we've got 3 questions here, and I'm just talking because I think Meg's going to sort them out for me in a second. I'm asking her to do everything at the same time, and really, if you're not familiar with polls, what will happen in a second is some questions will pop up on your team screen. If answer them as honestly as you can. If you don't want to answer them, that's absolutely fine. You can just shut them down. Do be aware that if you answer them with any answer, you also still have to close the screen down. It doesn't automatically disappear. It's a function in Teams, it just doesn't disappear. So when that comes up in a second, please click on it, answer it, and then close it down. And if you've got the chat open, the results will be reported in the chat. So it's really transparent and everybody can see what's going on there. Thank you so much. If you have just joined us, please do put your name and where you're from in the chat bar, which really helps to understand who's here. Oh, we've got great turnout. So just working on the polls at the moment. First question, here we go. When was your last Ofsted inspection? Fantastic, and I can see people answering that now. Hopefully no problems with anyone. Don't forget to close it down if you have answered it, because they don't automatically disappear. Just give people another minute. Fantastic, thank you. And again, if you look at the chat, the answers are in the chat. We've got about 25 responses, about 35 people on the call, so that's probably about right. Is everyone okay with that? No one's having any difficulty? Do shout. It's a very inclusive session. I very much want to hear from you. So if anyone's having any problems, don't be shy to come forward. I am assuming that the deafening sound of silence means that everybody's got to grips with that. Awesome. Thank you. So could we move on to our next question? And really this is going to inform some of our discussion later and is why I'd like to ask it. So the next question is what did you get in your Ofsted inspection? So Meg will just pop that up now. And once again, answer as honestly as you can, as much as you know. If you don't want to answer the question, you can just shut the poll down again.
Hello, my name is Dahaba. The chat box is not opening for me.
The chat bar isn't opening for you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm not quite sure why that is. If you you clicked on it and it just won't open? Hi, to the person who's having some problems with the chat bar. Have you resolved those? Are you okay there? Let's hope they've resolved those. I didn't see who it was. It didn't flash up on my screen. So hopefully that person's managed to answer some things. Meg, how are you doing? You all right? Yep, awesome. So we'll go in a second to the second poll. Obviously, we've still got people coming in. If you're still coming in, that's absolutely fine. This is just some of the housekeeping at the start, and it's always a little bit bitty. So do pop your name and authority in the chat bar if you've just joined us, and answer the poll that's in front of you. And for those who've just joined, and apologies for boring everybody else, the poll in front of you, please answer it as much as honestly as you can. If you're not sure, that's quite all right, and you don't need to vote. You can just close the box down. And also, once you've voted, you still need to close the box down again. And just to say, to see the results of the poll that you've just done, you do need to open the chat bar, and they come up in the chat bar. Lovely. So we've got about 17 responses to that poll. Aha, Catherine, you've got Ofsted in at the moment. Goodness. A very, very timely discussion then.
Yeah, it's their last day today, so fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. Well, hopefully this will help inform you and Scrutiny about the next steps and where you go then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the last poll, Meg, I don't think we've got a question for the last poll. We've just got a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So the question
Sorry,
for the
ignore that. I'll put it up again.
That's all right. You're doing fantastically well with our double act at the moment. So the final question in the polls is, in your Ofsted inspection, and obviously if Ofsted are in at the moment, you won't know. So Catherine, probably not one for you, but actually in your Ofsted inspection, if you think back to what Ofsted said, did they mention scrutiny, governance or councillors specifically in your Ofsted report? So that poll should now be with you. So yes, no or unsure, and it might be that you can't remember. And this is quite an interesting one. I'm particularly interested because Ofsted don't always mention some of the governance things or some of the councillors, or they might do it in terms of leadership and management, but they don't always mention specifically councillors, and certainly don't mention scrutiny often. Lovely, so we're getting those responses in now. And once again, if you have done your poll, don't forget to close it. Excellent. So the results of that look really, really interesting, I think. So looking just at the results of those polls. So there's a really even split actually between the results that people have got in their last Ofsted inspection. So 21% we've got outstanding, 36% 7 councillors say good, 21% requires improvement of 4 councils, and 4 councils inadequate as well. So a real spread over councils and their Ofsted, their gradings there. Out of the 19 responses, it's sort of gone up a little bit, and obviously you can keep responding if you've got there. And particularly around the question about scrutiny, councillors, governance being mentioned, 40%, so 11 people have said yes, it specifically was mentioned. 18% have said no, and 40%, again 11, have said that they're unsure, which I'm not surprised by that, because I think sometimes it can be a little bit lost in some of those reports back from Ofsted. And just back to the first question, I know some of you were just joining at that time, so you might not have seen it, but the first one was was your last Ofsted inspection? Don't know was about 22%. Within the last 3 years, we had about 37%, so 10 councils. And then within the last year, 40% of people here who are on the call, so 11 councils out of 27 responses. Of course, from some councils, I'm sure we've got officers and members from the same council, so it might not be that every individual response is from a separate council. We can have a look at that later, but that's not just to get a sense of who we've got in the room and what your ratings are. I think that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. If you are just joining us, please name and authority in the chat bar. Everyone will get bored of me saying that shortly. And I'd like to, without too much further ado, hand over to Jeremy Gleaden, who's with us this afternoon from Ofsted. Jeremy is a very experienced senior Ofsted inspector, and really we've asked Jeremy to give us 20 minutes to kind of walk through what are some of the key features of the ILACS arrangement, and really what should scrutiny councillors be looking out for. So Jeremy, I'd like to welcome you to the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll just share my screen because I've got some slides just to kind of guide us through and to act as an aid memoir for me. So just bear with me while I get those up. Camilla, if you could tell me when you can see those, that would be helpful.
I can see it now, but it's a little bit small.
Yes, I'm just trying to get it on slideshow. Bear with me. Okay.
Perfect.
So thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've been asked to say a little bit about ILACS. Now, on my slides, I'll come to in a moment. I'm particularly focused on, our interaction and what the framework has to say about elected members. I'm working on an assumption that most of you are familiar with our inspection framework for local authority children's services, the acronym being ILACS. That's what I'll refer to in future. I suppose I ought to say a couple of things really, just in case people aren't particularly familiar with it. We introduced ILACS back in January 2018, and we made quite a significant shift in our approach at that point. Prior to then, inspection of local authority children's services had been a single event on a 3-year cycle. When we introduced an inspection framework, we always intended that cycle would last 3 years, and we always intended that cycle would repeat. Within living memory, firstly, we rarely got it completed within 3 years. It was usually close to 4 years. And to date, none of those cycles ever repeated. In a 4-year period, the world moves on, and we always replace the inspection framework with something newer that was refreshed, etc. ILACS is different in a number of ways, and most significantly, we haven't replaced it after the first cycle. From around about December last year, we were starting to do the second round of inspections of local authorities. So I believed when we created ILACS that we got something that had the legs to run more than one cycle. That belief has been vindicated by the fact that we're now doing that. The change that I referred to was to move away from a single event. We do still have a 3-yearly inspection where we make a graded judgment about your performance. So, outstanding, good, requires improvement to be good, or inadequate, which you'll all be familiar with. But what we also introduced were some inspection events that happened between those, and we called those focused visits, where you get an inspector for 2 days, or sorry, 2 inspectors for 2 days, looking at a particular cohort of young people or a particular part of the service. And whilst we publish a letter as a result of that, we don't make a graded judgment. we set out what your key strengths and areas for improvement are. And if we find widespread or serious failings, then we'll make what we call an area for priority action. The intention of those focus visits was to try and, quote, catch before they fall, to have an opportunity, if we have intelligence that suggests a place might be struggling a little, to get in there, to look at that, to provide you with some really constructive feedback, and give the local authority the opportunity to do the sort of the remedial work in order that when we do come in to do the next inspection, hopefully that doesn't mean a drop in grade, and absolutely we want to avoid local authorities dropping into the inadequate grade. Now, that still happens, but over the last 5 years or so, and let's not forget we had the pandemic in there and all the associated challenges with that, we've seen the grade profile significantly improve. I think we had 2% of local authorities that were outstanding under the old framework. It's now 16% and rising. We've also seen a significant reduction in the number of those that are inadequate. So I think as an inspection framework, it has been an improvement. It does mean that you see us slightly more regularly. We also have a couple of activities outside of inspection. So we ask you to send us an annual self-evaluation, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of this piece, because I think I hope it'll be helpful to you. And then we have what's called an annual engagement meeting with your Director of Children's Services and usually one or two other senior leaders. And that gives us the opportunity to really get underneath the quality of your self-evaluation and to have a constructive professional dialogue outside the kind of hothouse of inspection. And I think we've found those helpful in terms of us keeping in touch with where you're at and how things are improving or not. And generally the feedback from directors of children's services have been that has been assisted. So what we have there is less of a single one point in time, one size fits all kind of approach, to a more of a nuanced system of inspection that has a number of factors. And of course, the bit that I ought to have said but haven't to date is we also introduced a sense of risk-based and proportionate approach. So if you're in that fortunate position of having achieved good or outstanding, your next inspection will be a short inspection. You'll only have inspectors on site for a week, whereas if you're inadequate or requires improvement to be good, you'll get what's called a standard inspection, which is a 2-week inspection, and that does feel to be proportionate and allows us to be more risk-based. So that was a bit of a whistle-top spin through the framework. What I want to do now is just talk about what the framework has to say about elected members' roles, and particularly the lead member. And we very explicitly make reference to the statutory guidance on the roles and responsibilities of DCSs and lead members, because I think that's important statutory guidance, not least of all in determining roles and responsibilities, but the clarity around the operational responsibility sitting with the Director of Children's Services. What we say in terms of engagement with particularly lead members is that we will usually arrange a phone conversation between the lead inspector and both the chief executive and the lead member for children's services during that 5-day notice period, so that we are getting that, getting your perspective and the chief exec's perspective before we get on site and actually see the reality of what practice with children and families on the ground really looks like. This is a rather busy slide, so apologies for that. Within the section in the framework which is entitled Engaging with Leaders and Staff, there's a number of references to the responsibilities of lead members. And for example, it says where inspectors identify an issue arising from the arrangements for discharging the functions of the DCS and the lead member, they will have a greater focus on the quality and effectiveness of the local authority's assurance and compliance processes. And what that plays to is inspectors always have key lines of inquiry, and the effectiveness of the local authority's assurance and compliance process may become a line of inquiry. It may not. So that's an example of where you may see differences in the way that we inspect. You may see differences in the way that we report. So because we don't report on absolutely everything, we report by exception, as it were. We report on things that are particular strengths, and then we report on things that are particular weaknesses or things that need to improve. If we're silent on something, that's probably because it was okay. So that's why, in that poll that Camilla did earlier, when she said, did we report on scrutiny arrangements or the roles of members in a report, I would have expected that to be a mixed bag. We also within the framework talk about the implementation of the statutory guidance, which should see the DCS and the lead member providing a clear line of political and professional accountability for children's wellbeing. So we're absolutely in the business of wanting to see that borne out. And then we talk about the particular roles of DCS and lead members, and whilst it is permissible that those two individuals take on other roles as well, then what we're interested in is where they do have additional responsibilities, how those discrete roles and responsibilities to children's social care are protected, through local arrangements, etc. Within our framework, we have the area called the evaluation criteria, and that's where we set out our description of what good looks like. And within the judgment, which is the impact of leaders judgment, within the strategic leadership section of that judgment, we talk explicitly about the leadership of the council, including the chief executive and lead member and other members, that they and the DCS recognise and prioritise the needs of children, and that this is reflected in corporate decision making, action and active attendance at key committees and boards. So that's part of our description of good, as is that the chief exec and lead member are well informed and are able to hold the DCS and the senior leadership team to account for the quality of practice and the challenges within that local area. So they're part of how we describe good. My last slide, I just thought I'd sort of preempt the discussion that we're about to get into in terms of where does scrutiny add value. And I think you add the greatest value before and after inspection rather than during inspection, because inevitably our focus during inspection is on the operational work and the quality and impact that practice is having with vulnerable children and families. But I think very much in the pre and post inspection space, you have a role in holding senior leaders to account. Now, what do you get from us in order to assist you with that? Well, you get our gradings and you get our inspection report. And I would really encourage you not to simply rely on what the gradings are. I think, the devil is absolutely in the detail. We will always have a section in the report which is called what needs to improve. It's what we used to call recommendations, but we now have moved away from recommending what we think you should do to describing the area of practice where a weakness is, because we think it's for the local authority to determine what they actually do, but it's for us to set out, the areas that need improvement. And I'd ask you not to rely on those simply as well. We don't pull up every single weakness into the what needs to improve area, that some of the detail remains clearly expressed within the body of the report. So I would encourage you to use the totality of our reports. And as I said a moment ago, when we do a focused visit, we publish a letter which sets out key strengths and areas for improvement. But where we see significant, serious and widespread failings, we may also make an area for priority action within a focused visit, and that's really flagging something that is of great concern. I think you have a role in terms of the quality of post-inspection action planning. Your local authority, when we inspect you, is required by regulation to publish an action plan. And I think, part of scrutiny is to ensure that action plan, the veracity of that action plan, and in an ongoing way, the implementation of that action plan. And within that, I think your key focus should be around seeking evidence of improvement with a particular focus on social work practice with children and families. I think a lot of what officers will put before you and need to put before you is often, data, but within that data, that sort of performance data, that doesn't always get you to the quality of practice. And that's why, and this is my final shot before I stop and we get into more of a discussion. When we ask your senior leaders to provide us with their annual self-evaluation, we ask them to answer these 3 questions. And the reason I flagged them here is I think these are the questions that you as elected members legitimately can and should be asking of your senior officers. So what do you know about the quality and impact of social work practice within your local authority? How do you know it? Where are you getting that evidence from? And what are your plans for the next 12 months to maintain or improve practice? So, what do you know about the quality and impact of practice? What are you doing about how do you know that? And what are you doing about it as a result? I think those are the 3 key pillar questions that really get you to the heart of how well your local authority children's services department is doing. And I think any director of children's services or senior leader should be able to answer those 3 questions at any given moment in time. So I'm going to come out of sharing now so that we can see each other's faces and see where we go. Is that okay, Camilla?
Jeremy, that was fantastic. Thank you very much for summarising a very complicated process in a few short slides with a real kind of clarity on those, particularly on those 3 last questions. I just wondered if you're happy, Jeremy, just to open up for a couple of questions if members
Absolutely.
had any. And if we just do a few questions, and then my plan was to go into some breakout rooms so everyone gets a chance to perhaps share a little bit between themselves, and then come back here for kind of a whole session discussion, because there are so many of us. So does anybody have a question over clarification of anything that Jeremy said, or really something that you wanted Jeremy to cover but he hasn't, or that he touched on and you'd like a little bit more detail? Whatever your experience of Ofsted to date is, whether that's you're from an outstanding authority, you're from an authority that's on an improvement journey, or you've got Ofsted in at the moment. I think we've got everybody in all of those extremes and in between in the room at the moment. So do we have any questions from the floor at all? do just put your hand up. Obviously, if you're not familiar with Teams, that's the raise hand button at the top of the taskbar. I think most people are fairly familiar with Teams these days. I'm not seeing any questions there, Jeremy. What you said must have been, aha, there we go. Wait, I was going to say what you said must have been so clear that that there were no questions. I do have a question from Anna. Anna, please do come on in and ask your question. Turn your camera on and your mic on.
Hi, it's just to ask, obviously you've spoken about it being quite a positive framework that you want the ILACS to be. I just wondered if there was a way that you might move to be doing schools inspections or not, because obviously they still seem to be more on, you know, that sort of cyclical inspection, or whether this might be something that Ofsted introduced on a education basis.
Oh, now there's a question I didn't see coming.
Sorry.
No, don't apologise. I don't work in the school space. I'm very much in the children's social care space, with a particular focus around local authority children's services. It feels like a difficult time to be talking about schools inspection at the moment. And you know, I know my chief inspector is just putting out a public statement today about the recent tragedy, etc. I suspect, frankly, Anna, over the next few months there will be quite a bit of reflection around how we inspect schools. Interestingly, the current framework, what's called the EIF, the Education Inspection Framework, came about just after we introduced ILACS. So I think ILACS was influential to some degree. Given the volume, there are 152 local authorities. There are how many thousand schools? You know, I don't even have the figure in my head, but it's you know, it's probably a 5-figure number. To have a regime as I've described that we have with local authorities, where there's more than one event and there's sort of that kind of ongoing relationship, I don't think would be achievable within a region, a reasonable budget. I think there is perhaps something to reflect on in terms of contact outside of inspection, because I think that has assisted us in our relationship with many local authorities. But I don't want to give you any sort of false sense of change within the schools inspection framework. I say again, I think there will be, now is a moment for some careful contemplation around that.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you,
you,
Anna, for your question. Hopefully that answered it really well, actually. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, I've got one in the chat from Earl. Earl, you're very welcome to come in and ask your question if you want.
Thank you, Camilla. It's just really about the reference to your previous poll about include references to scrutiny in the report. I'm just curious as to whether there's any guidance to inspectors to make reference to contributions made by scrutiny in that process, because it seems to be, by the responses, a bit hit and miss. I don't know whether there's one of your things to consider, or it's just dependent on the nature of the inspection and the inspector individually deciding these things.
I think there's two parts to my answer to your question, Earl, and thank you for it. The first thing is, as I said at the beginning of my little presentation, we do report by exception. So I'm not surprised that some people, you know, some reports talk about scrutiny and others don't, because we report by exception. So if it's a particular strength or a particular worry, then we're likely to report on it. If it is neither a strength nor a worry, we may be silent on it. So and I think that's okay. The second part of my answer is, when Camilla and I were talking back end of last year in preparation for this afternoon, I think we landed in a place where we realised that we in Ofsted, I think, used the term scrutiny different to how you use it, and I think, you know, your role in scrutiny is to scrutinise is to hold the lead member for children's services to account as part of that, you know, the local democracy, etc. Whereas I think we talk about scrutiny in terms of elected members' scrutiny senior of officials and holding the DCS and his or her senior leadership team to account. So I think there is something about language in there where we've been perhaps less than precise. And you know, when Camilla and I talked about this, I undertook that I would take that away and, you know, and ponder that further. So I think there is something about language. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I think just that point around that clarification around the role of scrutiny members, because particularly local politics being local politics, it can be quite difficult to have the kind of frank discussion that often is required if people take a particular stance. If it's a great report, it's a bit like, you know, the baby, that if everything's great, everybody's say I'm part of it. If it's an issue, then people are less inclined to throw their hands up in the air. So I guess it's that clarification around the respective roles and the value of those contributions, perhaps referring to it in the reports, because often even a reference to, you know, should be going back to scrutiny to look at in more detail. It may be obvious, but sometimes it just gets lost in the politics of it. Put it that way.
Sure.
Thank you. It's worth also saying that as part of the work of this roundtable through CfGS, we'll be putting together a publication that is trying to draw out some of these complexities. And Jeremy and I talked at length about, you know, the misnomer of the term scrutiny and what does it mean, and how is that applied. And I think if you search scrutiny and you look through the ILACS framework, it's peppered throughout with several different kind of intents, and it's certainly not the kind of local authority scrutiny role, that critical friend role that we would necessarily recognise. But alongside that, we are looking at a publication that will be out in the next couple of weeks, working on it now, and this discussion today will feed into that. So the idea with that is that it just helps fill a bit of that gap, because it is unclear, I think, for scrutiny members, how do you add value to the process? How do you make sure you don't duplicate the Ofsted process? And equally, and I think, as Jeremy said, really, really importantly, you don't just take what Ofsted have said and that's chapter and verse and that's the exact judgment and everything that you ever need to look at, and you keep on having some of those challenging conversations. I think if we take one more question, and then we'll move on to some discussions. I've got two questions now. Okay, let's do two questions. So if we can quickly do the two questions, I've got Councillor Rob Hannaford and then Councillor Philip Howells. Rob, over to you first of all.
Thank you, Camilla. Councillor Rob Hannaford, Chair of Children's Scrutiny at Devon County Council. I just really wanted to add in and push back again on the use of language, because the Ofsted comments that we had a while back referenced scrutiny, but it was very much taken on board that it was solely the scrutiny from the actual scrutiny committee itself, Children's Scrutiny. And then all of a sudden, Children's Scrutiny became a lightning rod that we were responsible solely on our authority for all the failings, all the problems, everything that had gone on or not gone on. Which was really challenging, because actually most of the things that Ofsted had picked up historically over many years, my committee had actually raised and been making recommendations to the cabinet to sort out. They hadn't sorted them out, but that wasn't our fault, and it wasn't for the want of trying. So then we had to sort of fight a rear guard action and sort it out. I mean, we did use it as a call to action, obviously, and have had a very good review now in terms of where we are in terms of scrutiny. But I think we went through a lot of blood and guts that we needed to as a scrutiny committee, because of the use of language, and people jumped on the bandwagon about it. So I know it's difficult, but I think it really is important, because I think we wasted a bit too much time and energy sort of justifying ourselves when we didn't need to in some cases. I'll just leave it there, Camilla.
Thank you very much.
You could add to that.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaford. Jeremy, anything quickly to respond to that?
I mean, thank you, Rob. I think that's I absolutely get that, and that's what I've taken away from the conversation that Camilla and I had back end of last year, so that, like I was this morning, when I'm reviewing inspection reports, I'm looking for lead inspectors, you know, real specificity. Let's be absolutely clear what it is, what and who we're criticising here. Let's not leave anything left to the reader to interpret. You know, be that about in this space or about anything. So no, we are very much live to it, but I hear you, and you know, I get your experience from what happened there.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hopefully, if nothing else is processed, I think to achieve that would be actually a huge deal, actually. So thank you so much for taking that away. And then last question, Councillor Philip Howells.
Yeah, thanks very much. And one of the problems with scrutinies, of course, is councillors can change every 4 years, and even the committee can change every year.
Yeah. So
we really grapple with not having councillors like rabbits in headlights when they first come into a new scrutiny committee. And that's quite an issue. Obviously, I'm sure every council has that issue, trying to get a proper training and education programme in place, which we're working on. But in Herefordshire, we're currently, well, first of all, we're in an improvement plan, and we've just had an inadequate Ofsted rating. So we have an improvement board with a commissioner, obviously, overseeing. So what we have to learn is the scrutiny role changes, because in a sense, the improvement board is really acting as the scrutiny on the improvement plan. So what can we add and where can we add value? And what we've seen that is actually working with the DCS on areas where, in this case, he thinks that we can help in scrutinising the areas of improvement. And so work programming is a critical issue for scrutiny committees with limited time and usually bi-monthly meetings. For the first year, we had monthly meetings because with the improvement plan and everything else, but that's unsustainable. So I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about work programming for scrutiny. The way we do it is make sure we work with the DCS and say, what are the areas that are key challenges for you? And so we have got evidence of our own where the issues are, but that probably is the best way of getting the areas where, from the point of view of the service, where we can add value. Does that seem right to you? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think so. And in my experience, having sort of, from a distance, seen a number of local authorities going through the very challenging process that you're going through to try and, make that improvement, from a challenging baseline. Whilst there are commonalities, I don't think, I think each place has to find their own way through that particular wood, as it were, really, because, your local context will be different to the local context of, place X. I think I would continue to point you to those 3 questions that I posed at the end of my presentation. I think, because I think where you can be assured is if your senior leadership and your director of children's service is able to identify where the challenges are, and even if what they're doing is describing a catalogue of weaknesses, that can, if they're able to identify it, they're likely to be able to remedy it. The most worrying places are those who don't recognise it, and inspectors have to come along and tell them. And what we've done through ILACS is try to, give real and proper credit to senior leadership teams and to the local authority where there may be, a range of weaknesses, but they know about it, they understand it, therefore they're likely to be in a good position to be able to do something about it. The most worrying places is those that don't even spot it. So if through your scrutiny you're able to assure yourselves that your leadership team is on it and they understand it, I think I think you will add value in that space.
Thank you, Jeremy. I would also add to that, I think work programming absolutely is key, but also how are you triangulating that evidence? Are you going on visits? Are you speaking to, kind of the frontline staff? Are you speaking to service users? How are you hearing that voice there? How are you getting a different view rather than just relying on your DCS? How are you giving that kind of evidence a little bit more? Now, what I'd like to do now, because I'm conscious that we've got 40 people in this room, and if we just stay in a room together, it's quite difficult to hear from everyone. I'd like to go into breakout rooms just to give you a chance to talk to each other and to share some of your learning with each other, but just for about 10 minutes. So Meg, if you're here with us and doing whizzy things in the background, there you are, fantastic. Could you arrange to put people in breakout rooms? We're going to have about 10 minutes, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to talk to each other. I'm not going to be too prescriptive, but really I'd like you to discuss what your experience of Ofsted is. What have you heard so far? And you know, what are your concerns about Scrutiny working with Ofsted? And we've teased out some of those already, but actually discussing them a little bit more would be really, really helpful. We'll then come back into a room. I will invite you to join in a discussion and have kind of a more general discussion for our last half an hour or so together, because I'm really conscious of taking up too much of your time. So Meg, when you're ready, if you can magically whisk people into breakout rooms, and we'll see all of you in minutes till everybody joins us. And we are recording again. Obviously, there are two parts of the recording, the first part and the second part. You didn't necessarily want Meg and I having a chat whilst we were waiting for everyone to come back in. And I should say, Jeremy has had to head off now because he's got another place to be at 2, but has undertaken that actually if there are any outstanding questions, we can always put them to him. And obviously there will be a publication that will go alongside this, which will aim to support scrutineers, officers and members in kind of effective working with Ofsted. Thank you. If you do have to go, that's not a problem at all. I've seen a couple of messages in the chat. Please do go. I think we'll be sharing the recording, won't we, Meg? So if you miss any of it, you're very welcome to dial in and watch the bits again. What I'd like to do is just hear from the groups. So I think there were 7 groups in total. I'd really like to hear from you now. We've got about half an hour left, and it's not my intention to run over. But if we go in the groups, and actually I always like to do things kind of about face. So if we hear from group number 7, first of all, do you have a representative? Do a couple of you want to share? What were your reflections on the question that was posed? What are your thoughts generally?
I didn't note our number, sorry, so I don't know which group.
Oh, you don't. Okay, you don't know. That's absolutely
No.
fine. I should have asked you to note. Meg, do you have any way of telling who was in which group? Possibly not.
Yes, I'll try and. Who was speaking? Sorry. Just then.
Councillor Howells was speaking
Yes,
then.
I asked the question, yes.
If not, I can just ask for volunteers, and we can do it in a very democratic way.
Councillor, you were in room 5. I'll try and see if I can pop them in the chat by copying and pasting it.
Wonderful.
It might take a couple of minutes though, so bear with me.
Well,
Shall we start then?
Let's go with group 5 first then. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'm sure the others have got comment, but one of the things I raised was we don't really have an Ofsted experience because we haven't been involved. And one of the group members said that their chair of scrutiny was actually involved some time ago, but not in inspection sense. And I think it would be really good if there was some communication with scrutiny, whether they're going to be involved or not, because we were like in limbo and didn't know. It's probably a good thing if you're not, because you're not being examined yourself. But it would really be good to know. So since you've asked the question, that would be my major feedback. We didn't have any connection, and I wasn't sure whether we should do or not. That would be a good learning to, like when you have that pre-meeting talking with the lead member, to talk with scrutiny chair, or at least a communication to say we're not going to be talking to you, or yes, we want you involved. I think that would be really useful to know.
Like an advance warning.
Advance warning, yeah. And the other thing that I mentioned was that there was great pressure from the officers when we were on improvement board for the scrutiny vice chair not to be on it, because they thought that would compromise our integrity. We didn't agree with that, and we fought hard. And against officers, I wouldn't say wishes, but against their feeling, the chair of the improvement board agreed that we should be on it. In fact, we were sort of guest members initially, but now I'm actually a member of the board. We've actually made it a bit smaller, so the vice chair isn't on it. And my other members of the group said, did I get any value of that? Did I feel compromised? Quite the opposite. By looking at the improvement board, we've used it to help inform the members, such as social workers came to the improvement board and their experience. Lovely. And how things are improving. So by passing that back to members, we can help members learn and see what's happening with workers in the field. So that was my two thoughts that came from it.
I think the point around the improvement board is a really clear one, actually. How is Scrutiny working with that improvement board? And I think, you know, if Scrutiny isn't, or a Scrutiny member isn't on the improvement board, then being able just to sit in and listen to what's going on with the improvement board and how that feeds through, that really clear communication, I think is really, really important. Jane, did you want to come in? Were you in that group too, or is it a wider point about the improvement board?
Yeah, I was in the group too, so it was kind of following on from that. But I was just going to say, in terms of producing things afterwards, I think that kind of interrelationship between Scrutiny and improvement board, how that's worked in other places, is really useful, particularly for those, you know, those kind of councils working through where we are at the moment of an inadequate rating, and how do you kind of find your way through from Scrutiny? Is so what other places, you know, what approaches do other places use? Within our group, we had different approaches in terms of relationship with the Scrutiny improvement board, in terms of like attendance, provision of information, whether there's any conflicts, whether there's overlap, and how does that work? So I think it feels that a lot of sort of departments then focus on their improvement board rather than Scrutiny, and they're different kind of bodies and having different kind of functions, and there needs to be a rightful place for both. And I think we're getting some pushback on that at the moment in our own authority, and I can understand people are busy and they've only got so much to do, but Scrutiny, overview Scrutiny, should be doing more, and to have examples that you can quote from other places around the country as evidence of what they're doing is really, really helpful.
Fantastic, Jane. Thank you. That's really, really well made points there. I think, you know, we have CfGS have two case studies so far, Devon and Stoke-on-Trent, who have shared their experience of Ofsted with us, and they've been shared as infographics. And I think Megan has tweeted them out and LinkedIn them out, and you should have seen those. But actually, we're really happy to do more examples of Scrutiny and kind of members and officers sharing your experience, particularly around this issue, because I think a lot of people are trying to find their way in the dark around it. So if you have an experience you'd like to share it, please do get in contact with myself or with Meg. We can support you with that. Meg's done loads of the infographics and is fantastic at that sort of thing. But actually, just some of those key messages coming out. How are you approaching things? Really important. Jeannie, please do come in. I'm sorry I didn't bring you in. I know you had your hand up before.
That's okay. It's just in terms of relationships with the improvement board, really. So we were judged inadequate. We've been on an improvement journey. We've just got to good. But when we were judged inadequate and we had the improvement board, we took regular summaries of the reports that went to the improvement board. Our chair sat on the improvement board, and our argument, and you know, there was pushback because it was seen as duplication and repetition from officers, but our argument was that scrutiny takes place in public and there needs to be some public accountability, particularly as a result of the high profile child death that occurred, and as a result of that the inspection we were found to be inadequate. We needed that public scrutiny and that public accountability of the work that was happening to improve the services. We were forever tweaking the reports. We never quite got to the right level of detail or summary for members, but they came every time there was an improvement board. A summary of the report came to the scrutiny board as well.
I think that's really useful.
About the public.
Yeah, I think that
doing it in public.
That public accountability is really, really important. And of course, do remember, members and officers, that scrutiny can ask for whatever it wants on its agendas, on its work programme. You can ask for it. There might be pushback from officers, but I think, as Jeannie said, there's a really well-made case there about, you know, there does need to be public accountability. You also need to look at the impact and the value that you're adding. But actually, if those reports are already done, there's a clear case to be made with officers that they don't need to duplicate efforts. You're not necessarily asking for a whole new report to be written, but actually even just having the exact summaries of it shared with members to inform what's going on. Thank you. So we've heard from room 7. I think we're there with room 7. Jeannie, you were in, oh, I've got them in not in the right order. Sorry, I'm going back up. So Jeannie, you were in room 4, I think. So let's cover off anything else from room 4.
Unless anybody else wants to chip in, I think I made that point about scrutiny being made in public, but also in terms of the role of scrutiny, I think is probably more important before and after inspection rather than actually as part of the inspection. So we were inspected last year, so we've got that. We took the action plan at the last meeting, and the Director of Children's Services came to explain what was going in the improvements and things that they were doing to improve outcomes. For me, I think the self-assessment is really valuable because actually our Director of Children's Services can't hide anything. I don't think he would want to. He's quite open and honest with the board anyway, and in pointing out the weaknesses and the areas of improvement that are required. But actually having to know yourself, which I think is how it's described, kind of is an honest conversation then.
Yeah.
You know, so
and
we know
does that
it's
get
not
reported
good
in
enough.
public as well?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if that's standard or whether it's just our DCS is quite open and honest with members. But it's like, yeah, we know that we're too reliant on agency staff. We know that our record keeping needs improvement, but this is what we're doing about it.
I think it's definitely good practice for Scrutiny to see the self-assessment there, and actually that's something that should be as a regular part of it.
Yeah, it was published as part of the papers.
Perfect, lovely. Thank you very much, room 4. So sorry, we've heard from room 5.
There was other things in room 4 about concerns around the pressures that Ofsted put on staff, and in terms of wanting to focus on the work rather than focusing on the inspection. And I think that came up as part of the discussion as well.
Obviously, it's in the national news at the moment, and we touched on it earlier. And I think that additional pressure in public services, where individuals are already stretched and already striving to do a really, really good job. And I think there is a responsibility in Scrutiny there to sense check well-being of staff, to ask them those questions about how we know whether we're looking after the staff teams, and that's senior leaders right down to kind of frontline staff. Actually, what are you getting from HR on that? And there is a role for Scrutiny, I think, in that of sense checking. How are we looking after our staff? And it doesn't matter what inspection results you get, it is still an onerous process to go through and a really concerning one. So I think asking some of those questions and Scrutiny being empowered to do that, I think is a good point. And we sort of, we keep learning and keep having that as a conversation. So thank you very much. Room 3, do we have a representative from room 3 who would like to come in and share anything else that you discussed? It's there in the chat. It was made up of Anne Hawley, Councillor Lee Redman, Councillor Rob Hannaford, Julie Beebury and Councillor Liz Madison. Anne, you're there. Would you like to come in?
Hi, Camilla. Yes, only to say that it was quite interesting to hear Councillor Hannaford's point of view on it. I do have to confess I've come into this completely almost blind, having just recently joined Torbay. So my knowledge is very limited, but it's been very interesting to listen to the conversations that have been happening in respect of it. So again, the councillors that were in my group may well wish to comment on it further.
Rob, are you still with us? Did you want to come in and say anything there?
Yeah, I am. I better declare an interest. Anne-Marie used to have to put up with me as a scrutiny officer at the City Council for a long time. So, she, like you, Camilla, she has she had that burden to carry. But anyway, I think. I think the experiences of Ofsted up were again around language. I also think the actual way that the reports are written, quite often the front page of the report is very damning, very severe, and then once you work through the report on the other pages, then some of the areas of good come out. Maybe it has to be written that way, but I think the trouble is the media and some members never get beyond the first page, so it's all glass half empty, not half full. Which I think can be a challenge because that's what makes the headlines and the other bits don't. I think also what came out from both Somerset and Devon was our experience that it was wrong to merge the adults and children into one committee. Again, that over the years results in a significant, in my view, loss of traction, and they need to be kept separate and split out because they're just two massive areas of work. So I think that
lots of nods on that one there, Rob. I think
absolutely. And Lee, have I forgotten anything? Could you come in and if I have, please?
No, it's I think the important part that you make, Rob, is actually right. When you do get your reports, go as Scrutiny and officers. What you need to go past the first page, because you'll be surprised. Because generally the outcome of Ofsted is on balance, as opposed to in too much detail. So there's usually for bad reports, there's usually some good bits, and good reports, there's usually some bad bits that Scrutiny might want to delve into.
I think that's a lovely tip, actually, and really, really helpful to hear that from councillors. Thank you very much. Room 3. Room 2, can we hear from you now, please? If you're not sure if you're in room 2, all of the names are in the chat. Nobody rushing to come forward from room 2. Anybody at all want to feedback? Oh, hello.
Hi, I'm Jeet Baines. I was in group 2, and I'm a scrutiny officer at London Borough of Ealing. And just around the pandemic, we had a scrutiny panel that was looking at the action plan from an Ofsted inspection that had just taken place. So the action plan was quite detailed, and the panel unfortunately wasn't able to conduct any site visits, although it was keen to want to do that. But we did speak with social workers who did explain the challenges they had. So there was problem in retention and things like that, and affordability. Social workers were finding it difficult to stay in London. So after they were trained, they tend to kind of move away to other parts of the country where they could afford to live there. So affordability was quite a significant factor in retaining staff, and they did have a large number of agency staff at the time as well. So we've had a recent revisit, and that was a lot better in the sense that the council had made lots of improvements since the visit we had, and it's likely that we'll have a scrutiny panel next year looking at children's services. So I expect the panel will pick up on some of these issues and see what has happened. So we don't do it regularly, but this coming year we're likely to focus on children's services a lot more.
Thank you, Harji. I think I do wonder, I mean, we're talking in general terms about how scrutiny approaches the working relationship with Ofsted and what Ofsted says about scrutiny and how that works. I do wonder around that some of the specifics, actually, if particularly those authorities who had a more challenging, if I put it that way, Ofsted that was inadequate or does require improvement, I wonder if we listed the issues, you know, what crossover there would be. I suspect it's quite high. You know, I think recruitment and retention is a huge one for all authorities, and I think there are a number of things that are outside the control of the local authority that all of us try and grapple with, but are really, really difficult, and how they affect Ofsted ratings and how they affect the experience of children and young people's lives is really important. And it's almost, I feel like we could do another session of this just talking about some of those specific issues, and actually maybe sharing some of the experiences would be really useful. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. Thank you very much, Harjeet. Room 1, we have not yet heard from you. Do we have any volunteers from room 1 to feedback? Charlie, I think you're trying to talk, but you're on mute.
Sorry, had to be one. I was in room 1, but yeah, I feel like Southwest and Devon has been represented quite well today. So I mean, I'm happy to talk, or if Helen or Jackie want to come in as well. I suppose we were just kind of sharing the learning that we've had. You know, Devon being inadequate, and Jackie's and Helen's authorities being kind of outstanding, and what practically that difference made for kind of scrutiny, and you know, having improvement boards or not, and how you actually kind of make impact as a scrutiny committee when you've got other things going on in children's services.
Thank you. Jackie, did you want to add to that?
I'll just come in so Charlie isn't on his own. Yeah, we're lucky because we were outstanding, but I think the first time the service got that rating, Ofsted did look hard at scrutiny, and one of the things we were doing was using like an external expert for our safeguarding scrutiny, and they commented on that in the report. And I think we've had other Ofsted since then, and they haven't looked so much at scrutiny. So that was just something that was helpful to us, having that external expert, just something to share.
So just Jackie, just on that, so I'm clear, that's an external expert that the scrutiny team employ to support good scrutiny?
Yeah, that's right. So we use someone from the LGA, one of their expert advisors, who's been a director for another council
for children's services. So she comes in, we've used her a couple of times. She comes in, she will review the reports because we have a themed meeting for safeguarding. So it's safeguarding looked after children. And she'll look at the reports, do a little sort of mini briefing training session for the committee, and they'll talk about key lines of inquiry. And then after the meeting, she comes back and meets the chair and we talk things through.
Lovely. That sounds like a really, really good practice. I think lots of authorities will be very jealous of you, I imagine.
Get in touch with the LGA because the advisors are brilliant. I'd really recommend that.
Excellent. Fantastic tip there, Jackie. Thank you so much. Was there anything else room one wanted to share?
I was on the kind of impact and thing, just the kind of the approach that we've taken in Devon was to when we know Ofsted are coming is to prepare a mini briefing to them to show them this is the impact that we've made in the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever. So if scrutiny's brought up, they've the lead member or the DCS or whoever has something in their back pocket, they can say, yeah, here's what scrutiny's done.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's really helpful just around how do you get that message across? How do you get the message of scrutiny across? And I know that lots of colleagues have struggled internally within their organisation to say, what has scrutiny done? Having that on a page so it's really easily referenceable, I think is really, really useful. Thank you. Charlie, has that been shared? I think it probably has already. An example of that.
I'm not sure.
Not quite.
We can share ours if anybody would want to see it.
Quite possibly we can. Just looking, so we've had room 5. I haven't got a list of room 6 on there, Meg, but could we do room 6 if anyone knows that they were in room 6? Basically, if you're not on the list already and you haven't been covered in room 5, that's one of you. Anyone from room 6? There's not a massive rush. Perhaps let's go to room 7 then, because I can at least see who you are. So that's Linda Hunting, Jane Game, Caroline Topping, Councillor Chatterjee and Theresa Harden. On room 7, what were your reflections? Anything that we haven't already discussed?
Well, I think Theresa actually had a really good point. She's an officer. She's the officer at Suffolk County Council. I'm a Suffolk County councillor. I haven't had an experience myself having been scrutinised because I've been on 2 years and we're waiting. So we're probably the next ones in line. But Linda actually had a really good point, and so did Theresa. Theresa actually said you can't get scrutiny experience from being within the chamber, and she didn't mean that in a rude way, like I might have just said it a little bit too abruptly, but I actually agree with that. You need the lived experience, you need those people, and actually I think it might be a good idea to have some of our scrutiny off-site. We have some of our corporate parenting board meetings off-site, so it's easier for other people to get into us. Maybe we should be doing more scrutiny off-site so that we can get more experts and people with lived experience coming into us as well. Linda, did you want to pick up something? Because you had relevant points, but I'm sorry, but can't remember what they all were. Menopausal brain, sorry people.
No apologies necessary at all.
Thank you, Caroline. No, that was essentially what we were talking about, really. It was about members being able to, have the knowledge to properly scrutinise and to be asking the right probing questions, and that very often, particularly when we're talking about a lot of the topics that come up with these particular committees around children and education, and I think some of the examples I was using was also about health and so on, that very often the case is that members don't have the requisite knowledge or experience or both. And so because of that, we need to, as officers and as people working in policy and scrutiny and governance, we need to be able to equip them with the tools to be able to carry out their role proficiently. And I think the key sort of discussion for us at the moment in Westminster is about enabling that, and some of that is through the off-site visits that we talked about. And then some of that is through inviting experts in and having experts at things like pre-meetings or call over to assist the chair and members in helping them to formulate the right types of questions, because we know this is member led, so we can't obviously tell members or ask members what to ask, but it's about giving them the tools so that they can formulate those questions themselves and be able to scrutinise proficiently.
Absolutely, absolutely. Really nicely put, Linda. Thank you. I think really that, and I think we touched upon it earlier, understanding the lived experience. Actually, how are you triangulating the information? So you might be getting performance data, you might be getting matrices, you might be getting lengthy reports that tell you how a service is doing, but actually, how do you feel how a service is doing? And getting out there, speaking to people, getting away from the usual place, whether it's the town hall or whatever building it is, county hall, and actually just going out and having those ability to talk to service users, to talk to frontline staff often, and really understand what it's like on the ground. Are things working? And I think often that's a place where it's almost overlooked for scrutiny, but actually some really good changes can come from there, because you can see whether things are working and whether they're not working. And there's a really valid role for scrutiny in picking up those things on the ground. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Which just leaves us then with one group left, which is room 6. So we've got Teresa, we've got Rachel, we've got Earl, Howard and Katie. Anybody, last reflections from hearing from the groups?
If assuming my other colleagues, happy to chip in. I think the observation was a bit referring back to the inspection report as a baseline document to pick up and remind people as to go through the year, because it tends to be a thing that's done the inspection where lots of activity, then very little reference to it where it's a good report. But actually, the issues and topics within that report will be part and parcel, I would expect to see, of children's services remit. So there should be references back to it, and perhaps trying to engage officers who often think if it's a good report, we don't want to look at it again, and you're just creating more work for everybody. We're actually saying, how can we build on that? Because that was a point in time, and it may have been all the dominoes fitted at that particular point in time, which led to that result.
Yes.
And as people have already spoken about, if a director changes or a new cabinet member comes into that changes things. So to assume, well, if nothing is ever going to change, well, the reality is things might change. You end up with a very different inspection result 6 months, 12 months down the road. So it's planning for that eventuality, not relying on things staying as they are. I'm just talked about trying to keep officers happy in the sense of not thinking it's going to keep them actively engaged in that process, which is always going to be a challenge because directors have obviously got other priorities, and we've already spoken about the stresses related to kind of the whole inspection, the planning, the amount of work that's involved with it. But recognition, actually, the role of scrutiny is there to try and ask different questions, as you've already mentioned, Camilla. And I'll leave it for colleagues if there's anything more they want to add.
Thank you very much, Earl. I think that's a really nice comment. I know we're getting towards the end of time. Was there anyone else from room 6 who wanted to add to that? I'm going to take that as a no and just kind of wrap up. Really, I think before I kind of say final words and just some reflections on what we've discussed today, is there anybody else who would like to come in? There's a point that we haven't picked up on. You expect us to discuss something and you really want to get it off your chest before we close the meeting. Is there anything else that we really needed to have talked about? Not hearing anything. If I start talking and anyone thinks of anything, either pop it in the chat, do get in contact with us afterwards, or do just come in, because for me, so much of the importance of events like these are learning from each other, are learning about what practice goes out there, are some of those tips and tricks. And I think you've heard quite a few different things. And what's been really interesting for me to see is that actually some of those learning points are across the spectrum. We have people in the room today who are from councils who have outstanding Ofsted results. We also have some who are really inadequate and are on improvement journeys and everything in between. And I think sharing reflections and sharing how scrutiny can meaningfully add value. And for me, it's always about that. How does scrutiny add value? Not duplicate the process, but add value. I think what Earl was saying at the end there, that assurance process is really, really important. Where does the action plan fit into it? If scrutiny isn't regularly having your action plan on an annual basis, you heard from Jeremy earlier that's an annual process, actually get in there, have a look at it, see what it says. Is it accurate? Do you, and there is a real role for scrutiny in sense checking. The officers, your cabinet member, your exec member has said this. Is that right from your experience? What else can you add to it? Can you add to the action plan? And if not, how can you take that forward in your work? If you're doing annual work programming, and how does that fit into what it is that you are looking at? Are there areas that actually need more looking at, even in fantastic authorities? They probably are. How can scrutiny add value? What areas can you look at in your authority if you're not having that fantastic Ofsted result? Obviously, I think Jeremy said at the beginning, and something that was a really powerful takeaway for me was, it's not simply relying on those gradings. It's not just, you've got that headline point, that's it, don't look anymore. And I think you know, everything that we've heard back from you guys reinforces that, actually getting under there. I think Councillor Hannaford was saying, and Councillor Lee Redmond as well, you know, it's not just the front page, because that might be really negative, particularly in kind of, you know, some of those lower grades, but actually look in there, what's positive in there, and vice versa. If it's a really positive headline, actually underneath it, what's beyond there. Councillor Howers, did you want to come in very, very quickly? Oh, you're muted at the moment.
There was something I wanted to say and I'd forgotten. I just remembered when you said about triangulation. When we started our journey a couple of years ago, we said what we want to do is more bottom up than we have been. That we get the officers' feedback and we get the ward members' thoughts, but we weren't getting very good input from social workers and the public. And we said there should be far more bottoms up element of that triangulation. And that was regarded as being, oh, that's an innovative idea. And I don't know what other councils think, but it was actually, oh, that's a good idea. Perhaps we ought to be thinking about getting what the social workers think and the public think. And you know what? It has been so difficult to get that over across and to get the council to recognise we should be doing that. I equate it to a business. If you don't listen to what your customers say, then you suffer. Maybe you can go out of business. And if you don't listen to what your residents say and what your social workers are saying, and we weren't, and we still aren't effectively, I would say, that probably leads directly to an inadequate report. Because if you're not doing that, then you can't deliver effectively. And we really struggle with that. And we can't say now, but I think that'd be worth talking about a bit further, how we get that actually across. That should be a really integral part of the triangulation. In our view, it isn't.
Absolutely. And I think part of the conversation I've certainly had with Jeremy is, how is local authority scrutiny recognised as part of, how are Ofsted aware of local authority scrutiny and the role that it plays? Actually get scrutiny much more on the agenda. And that doesn't have to be necessarily during that inspection, although we've heard from Charlie about that kind of, you know, plan on a page. This is what scrutiny's done. This is our impact. You can see that. You can see that apart from things. You can see what we've called for. You can see what we've changed. But actually, that before work and the after work, you've got the inspection result. What happens then, and how are you bringing that there? I think, you know, final reflection. Those three questions I would leave you with. We will circulate the slides, of course. You know, what do you know around social work practice? How do you know it? And for me, the how very much around where is that evidence, and you know, what are your plans over the next 12 months to maintain or improve practice? And obviously that depends on your grading, and being empowered to ask those three questions I think are really, really powerful. Thank you so much, everybody. We are on time now. If you would like to share a case study, your experience, you'd like to talk to us further, to Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, please do get in contact. Meg's put her email address in the meeting chat. You can pop something through. If you want to be in the publication and want to share some of your ideas in there, we really welcome that. So please do send things over. We're on a little bit of a time frame and hoping to get that out fairly quickly. So get in touch with us sooner rather than later. Thank you so much. I don't think this solves it, but hopefully sharing some of those ideas is really, really useful place to start. I wish everybody the very best of luck, whatever your Ofsted inspection grade, and particularly the people who are going through Ofsted at the moment. Hope those inspection results come out really well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, and you. Bye-bye.